I'm Dr. Bill Sodeman, and on this episode of The Perfect Route, we're talking with Chris Chaia, who's authored a fascinating report about the business of coaching. We're going to dive into some details that are going to interest you if you're considering going into coaching or if you're thinking about engaging a coach yourself. So let's take a step onto the perfect route. So, Chris, what does all this mean for listeners and viewers who are thinking about jumping into coaching?
Yeah, I think about myself and when I got started. And for me, a big part of this was being prepared. I think that's the word that comes to mind for me. My prior occupation was data and research to drive decisions. And so, what data and research do you have available to you to help you understand as a practice what you need to consider, what you need to think about? Because for many of us, whether you come from corporate America or higher ed, we are used to not doing everything by ourselves, right? We have teams that we can ask to help us do the marketing or to do the administrative work that we have to do, our love of bookkeeping as an entrepreneur. So there's so much that you need to do in becoming an entrepreneur. So the word prepare comes up for me when I think about myself when I went into it, to better understand it's not just earning the credential if you are credentialed, as we talked about. It's about running a business and running a practice and making sure that you're building it to be sustainable and hopefully profitable. There's, in the prepared note, what comes to mind for me is the Department of the Bureau of Labor and Statistics puts out their report every year on small businesses and their failure rates. I hate to call it that, but that's really what it is. And we know this is the engine of it's 99% and change are small businesses that make up our economy. And the report that they put out, which when it gets back to the word of prepare, because I didn't want to be one of these statistics, is just shy of 50% at year 5 don't make it, sadly. And at year 3, just shy of 40% of small businesses, small, us, solopreneurs and others, struggle and they don't make it. So for me, I'm a big proponent of understanding as best you can about not just getting the certification and the education, which is lovely if that's your choice,
Mm-hmm.
but it's about building for the long term and for the long game for your business. So, um, there's a number of reasons why small business owners struggle, which we can get into
Mm-hmm.
if you'd like, but to me, it's all about being prepared. If you've got listeners that are thinking about doing their own 2.0 and jumping into it.
Yeah, and as you know, I've got a background in teaching and researching on business strategy, so I
Mm,
love talking about the long term,
mm,
which I feel many entrepreneurs fail to consider fully. And certainly in the, you know, I've gone through this with my own coaching business. There's a big thrill in getting it set up and
yeah,
running, and then there is the day to day. There is the administrivia that I like to call it.
yeah, yeah,
Keeping the books, making the appointments and calls, taking and reviewing notes on clients,
yeah.
all of which are fully necessary. But there's for a solo entrepreneur, unless you've got a virtual team or some people you can rely on, it can be a real grind.
It's a real grind. It's funny. I used to say I have a team of 3, me, myself, and I.
Hmm.
But and it's interesting. I'm not sure about you, but I know my I don't know, maybe my epiphany as a business owner is I thought about all the baggage and the gifts that come from your prior life that you bring into entrepreneurship. So the baggage might be like, as an entrepreneur, it is us that makes decisions very quickly. We no longer have to ask permission or get buy-in or ask for budgets because we have we are the C-suite
Hmm.
uh, for the business. Like we act in all roles and in all capacities. So um, coming from a prior occupation where all those things were covered for you, and you had the guarantee of a paycheck and a guarantee of a group that would support you and ability to give the work that you didn't want to do to another group. That doesn't exist anymore as an entrepreneur. So for me, it was very important to understand all the facets, kind
Yeah.
of going into it. We are the C-suite, all the C's within the suite. So it's us.
Right. And even that, uh, I look back on my days when I was a full-time employee, and now those guarantees um, don't seem as great. Some of the BLS statistics I saw recently was that 1 out of 4 people who report themselves as unemployed in this country have been unemployed for 6 months or more.
Mm,
They're still looking for a job. And we haven't seen anything like this since the pandemic.
no, no. And it makes it all the more important about back to that word prepare, like understanding the ebb and flow, just like a regular business that you came from, or higher ed or nonprofit or whatever. There's an ebb and flow to any business and in any industry, obviously. But when it's your own, I like to say highs and lulls, not lows, because what goes down must come up. But
Mhm.
um, yeah, there is a lot of headwinds
Yeah. Yeah.
that go with the tailwinds for sure.
Yeah. Um, and I just want to remind our listeners and viewers that we're getting ready to launch into a deep discussion about the Business of Coaching 2025 study that Chris has prepared, and it's available at coachonwards.com. I'm curious, what inspired you to launch this study?
Oh my God, where do I start? How long do we have?
As
So
long as you need.
yeah, I mean, I think when I started, I had before I entered into like the formal coaching program, I had just basic questions like how, in the spirit of preparing, like how do coaches win? Why are they? What do I need to know about? When do they lose? What do I need to know about? The maintaining of the business for the long term, the sustainability of the business. And I had heard a lot of coaches struggled with the business and with the failure rate, but there was no data or research. There was nothing around, is that true or is that just what I hear?
Hmm.
Because I couldn't get, like, again, me being the data and the research person, believe me, Bill, when I say this, I have literally, I'm looking at it, I have a stack of maybe, 2 feet tall of every research report and everything I could get my hands on. And there wasn't anything out there. So what inspired me is I do think that data should shape business decisions. It is a legacy carryover that I take from my own business world, that I came from, and so it just wasn't there. There was a lot on the landscape part of the business, but there wasn't anything on the business development side of the
Hmm.
business. And for me, um, again, for all the reasons that I just gave, that was important that I had more information. So I started talking with coaches across the globe. I decided that I didn't want it to be just about the North American population, which I can get into some interesting stats on North America versus the rest of the globe. But I started talking with people all over to say, if I self-funded this, would is that interesting to you? Am I the only one just getting into this business? And I talked to all levels of coaches with thousands of hours, master
Hmm.
coaches, and a few thousand of them roaming the earth here. And so I tried to talk to a number of people to say, if I built it, this is what I'm curious about. What are you curious about? And that became sort of fuel to my fire, if you will, to sort of create and fill for the gap, what I felt was a gap for
Right.
not having this type of research and data to help people that are both in the profession, seasoned coaches, as well as those that are starting out. And so that's what inspired me, to just to build for something that I didn't see that was out there. And then I engaged a firm that was outside of Boston, market research, and decided, I'm knowing your abilities and your capabilities. I knew the questions. Actually, the coaches in this study, probably 85-90% of the questions came from coaches on pricing, revenue, marketing, certifications, niches, administration, tech, you name it, all on sustaining a business model and all the things
Hmm.
that go into that. And so I said, okay, I've got all the questions. Uh, and I think the halo above it all for me was how do I strategically invest my time and my money and my energy and my resources into the business in a meaningful way. And that became sort of my halo, my own long game for this report, to be able to get information that answered those questions for me. Because when I was starting out, probably like a lot of listeners, there's so many hands out. Like there's so many people that are asking you for money or talking about this certification or that digital
Mhm.
tool or this new technology fancy thing over here. And so this whole shiny and new thing that goes on when you're setting it up, because like you said, it's exciting and you want to invest in these things. But I kept coming back and asking myself the question, why? What's the potential impact of this investment? And will it net me the value that I need as a business owner going forward? So that fueled why I said, okay, I'm going to hire this firm. And we went into the field in the last quarter of 2024. We released it at the back end of the first quarter of 2025, and that became the business of coaching. I can get into some details later, but
Okay.
that was the inspiration.
And again, the report's available at coachonwards.com. I'd
Which
encourage
was,
people to take a good long look at it. Certainly worth your time and investment. Definitely was for me. Um, and there's one thing you pointed out that just gives me some hope about the maturity of the coaching field, and that is our ability to move beyond the anecdotal and talking shop to actually getting to the hard numbers and seeing what the patterns are, not only presently, but what's going to emerge for the future. Because as we all know, this year has been full of economic tumult. It's been, for me, it's been a challenging year to start up a coaching practice, but I'm a relentless optimist. I always think things are going to get better.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there are a lot of other coaches in my position among the viewers and listeners out there.
Mm, there are.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
I always like to say what goes up what goes up comes down, and if it goes down, it must come up. So there is an ebb and flow, isn't there? And you know, I'm sure we'll get into this at some point, but in the spirit of preparedness, are you the predictability of income that if you're starting a business, that you're comfortable with getting that paycheck, and the potential unpredictability of income when you
mhm.
do have those headwinds and tailwinds that are coming at you, or the headwinds, namely. How do you ride the tide?
Yeah.
How do you ride the tide?
Yeah. And many solopreneurs go through this, but coaches have that added perspective of their own practice, whether it's business coaching like me,
Mm-hmm.
or personal wellness, or something else. There's just so many different kinds of coaches out there that bring their own perspectives, not only to how they work with their clients, but how they work with their practices. And that leads me to a question about if you had to take a snapshot of who took part in the study, what would it look like? What did the demographics look
Like
like?
the demographics, yeah. We had a fairly good showing, because I was obviously worried about it going into it, because who's Chris Chaia and who's Market Street Research and what are they trying to do here? So, but the more I talked with people, and it was a number of conversations. I was always on the phone the fourth quarter, just talking to everybody across the globe that would talk to me about what we were trying to do. So we had a very good showing. 308 coaches participated in the study. We had average age about 56 years old for a coach. We had 67, I believe, percent were female. The remainder were male, and 46% were in the ICF world, PCC and MCC, those master coaches that I talked about. So, and a number of other, like I said, great organizations out there that are doing coaching education. And we had just a fantastic showing, nice population of people. Um, I was curious getting into the profession, like, where are people coming from?
Mm-hmm.
If this was their own 2.0 or a secondary
Mm-hmm.
career. But and that was also interesting. 1 in 3 coach survey respondents were in it for secondary careers.
Really?
So this whole portfolio career and having side hustle, if you use the language of today. But so 1 in 3, this coaching is a profession that is has been incredibly beneficial for them as a secondary career. So um, yeah, so overall, we were very pleased with the population. Back to the question of where people came from, coming from the marketing communication side of the house. In my case, corporate America, I was very curious. Like, are all the people human resource types or learning and development types that are coming in? And we found that about 18% are human resource types that come into the profession, followed by sales and marketing, and
Mm-hmm.
then followed by education and learning and development. And then I think IT, nonprofit, and other prior careers came into it. So I think that's wonderful because I think there's a lot of different types of people bringing experiences into a profession, serving others. That that's a wonderful thing that they're coming from all these different types of professions. So really great turnout, I think, and a great composition, if you will, nice profile of the survey respondents that came into it.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that struck me when I was originally reading through the report. I came into business coaching through learning and development and adult education. I've spent
Mm,
my entire adult career working with working professionals.
mm,
So for me, it coaching was second nature. It was a very easy choice, um,
yeah, yeah.
especially business coaching. But of course, your sample includes many more kinds of coaches than the business coaches. But it does focus on the business of coaching,
Mm.
how do coaches actually act as business people, as entrepreneurs, which leads me to a question. Kind of reminds me of Star Trek movies when somebody asks Spock, how do you feel? How are coaches doing overall? Are they happy? Are they successful?
Oh gosh, that's the key word. And you and I talked a lot about this before on this. That success is so subjective, isn't
Yeah.
it?
Mhm.
And when I was talking with people, if I can spend a minute on that word success,
Mhm.
um, I remember distinctly having a conversation with somebody with thousands of hours of coaching experience. And he said, the one study that we were talking about had the average salary for a coach at $67,800. And the average number of clients a year were 12. And
Okay.
the average number of hours per week on your business, according to this study, was 13.2. And he said, I I think the 67,000, I think that's an insulting number. And,
Yeah.
there's so many coaches making so much more. And I said, well, that's true. However, if you're coming from a business where you're spending 50, 60, 70 hours a week working and you're exhausted and you're coming into a profession, let me see if I do the math right, for somebody that this is their definition of success, meaning I can work 13 hours a week and I can get to $67,800 a year and I get my work life balance back. Gee, that sounds like my
Mhm.
definition of success. So it got me thinking about, like, what is success and how are coaches doing? It was funny. It was one of the first questions we asked in the study. It was open ended. And we first started by saying, we're not going to define it for coaches. We're going to ask them if you had to define success. And there were over 500 responses. So the math won't add up to the numbers that I'm about to give, but because people had lots of ideas around what success looked like. But we did get that in, and no surprise, 81% said success to me is based on the client, the client outcome. If the client's coming back to me for my business, did I help them meet their goals? did I do the job that I was? It was very client centric for 81%. They said that's how I defined it. Another 24% said, you know what, for me, success is income. Like I want to make money. That's how I equate or translate. That's the definition of success for me. So it was very, very interesting. We then said, okay, based on your own definition of success, how successful are you? And we said, very successful, somewhat successful, so on and so forth. And 72%, interestingly, said, I'm either very successful or somewhat successful. And I'll stay on that for a minute because what was interesting then is we then moved to profitability. So 72% of the coaches, almost, 3 in 4 coaches are saying, I'm pretty happy with this profession. Like I'm doing the work that I am meant to do. And it's meeting my criteria, my definition for success. But then we moved to profit. And profit is such a funny word, right? We said, okay, if profit was defined as your ability to pay your expenses and pay yourself what you want to be paid, how are you doing? And what was very interesting is 44% said I'm either, 44% said I am either, profitable, or very profitable or profitable. And another 6% said I am not sure. So
Yeah.
so it was very, very interesting. So the number on the flip side of that is it's an extremely high number of individuals that were saying that they were saying they were not profitable. I'm sorry, when I said profitable, they were not profitable. 44% not profitable. Another 6% said I'm not sure. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not sure if I'm profitable or not. And so that was quite interesting because what we're saying is 1 in 2 coaches um, might be seeing great success, but there's not necessarily a correlation. We had people that said, I'm either very successful or successful, but I'm not profitable. And interestingly, in the data, the people who said I'm either very unprofitable or somewhat unprofitable still felt that they were successful. So there was data on both sides of it. It was very interesting that the information that came back on coaches. Um, so that was an interesting. I'm not sure what you thought when you read the report, but it was an interesting um, data point that came out of the study, that the relationship between success and profit is incredibly subjective, and one doesn't necessarily mean the other. You can be very successful or consider yourself very successful, but not be profitable. And those that consider themselves to be unprofitable or very unprofitable said, but I'm successful. So I think of that 3-year mark where the government says, 3 years, it's a hobby. If you're not paying
Right.
taxes and you're not, it really is a hobby. You can't get the tax advantages after 3 years. I found that interesting in the report.
Yeah. It did strike me as interesting because um, I don't think all coaches go into this thinking there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow.
Mm,
But if you set up as a business, then you're making the commitment to have positive cash flow. So it is a bit concerning for me, as a business education professional and a business coach that half of all coaches really aren't successful in terms of revenue, in terms
mm,
of profit generation. But
yeah,
as you point out, there are different definitions of success.
yeah,
And I think it would be interesting to chase down among the various kinds of coaches how they each define what success is, whether it's client outcomes or revenue generation or branding or something else.
yeah, yeah. We did ask, and I'm going to refer because I want to be able to give the data to the listeners, but we did ask, if you are not successful, what are the reasons for that?
Hmm.
And some of the main reasons that they felt that they were not successful is 71% said it's back to the attracting new clients, that's a real tricky part of the equation, I think, is the lead generation part of the equation. But that was the
Yes.
reason where um, people were struggling, followed by inconsistent cash flow. And the revenue was just lower than expenses, which gets to the profitability. 44% are saying, I'm not profitable. And
Mhm.
another 6% are saying, I'm not sure. We can pretty much put those into the non profitable bucket, I would assume, if they don't know the numbers. It gets us to the 50%. So it's not too surprising that the number one, number two, and number three, number one, two, three are all tied to dollars,
Right.
the business. So occasionally I'm going to look at my report if that's okay, because there's so many numbers. I don't want to misspeak. So I'm make sure I correct myself if I do.
Oh, that's important. And just a reminder for the listeners and viewers, coachonwards.com is where you can get the report that Chris and I are talking about.
50
Um,
pages of data. So I'm going to, my caveat in the beginning is I should get it all right. But if I don't on occasion, I will be looking at my report.
yeah, that report is just chock full of information. Like this nugget that I'm looking at right now, and this is um, just for your reference, Chris, this is on page 23. The top three challenges when running a coaching practices, we've mentioned lead generation,
Yep.
marketing, getting your name out there was number two, followed closely by time constraints. And, there's those three were clearly in a cluster right at the top. But
Mm.
and marketing and time constraints are all they're all wrapped up with that same rope and cinder block. you know
They are. And you know what's so interesting about the time constraints? The number three reason, right? The number three reason why people are challenged. When there is time, we asked them later in the study, when you do have the benefit of time, where are you spending your time? And no surprise, we have a group of learners, right? They go back
Mhm.
to their comfort zone of learning, but marketing continues to be a challenge for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so when that time, they say time constraints, but for our own study, it was the average time was 22 hours a week they spend
Hmm.
on their practice. So
Yeah.
22 hours a week is certainly not a significant time. We're going to get into the composition of somebody profitable and the whole coach versus entrepreneur in a little bit, but that was a very interesting piece of data that came at the end of the report, that when you do have time, when you do have a lull, which you're going to have, where do you spend your time? And marketing and business development is far farther down the charts there on um, and I talked to a lot of coaches after the study on, I find that to be an interesting, like, it seems like there is time, I think, but there's this contradiction, if you will, with this other piece of the data. And what so many coaches have said is, and perhaps this was my prior field, and this might be why I'm a hair more comfortable with it, much like you with learning and development with presentations, you're a hair more comfortable because it's what you've done. If for those that aren't coming from professions where you've had to turn up the volume on marketing and business development, it feels to some icky, or they don't, or it's uncomfortable making an ask. It's uncomfortable with follow up. We found that 26% don't follow up on their prospecting calls in their meetings, which is a real opportunity. And that's what I want this report to do. It's not a bad thing, it's just something to learn from. So
Hmm.
if 1 in 4 around aren't following up on the so I think part of that is challenging for people. Making an ask is harder for some people. Putting yourself out there, and maybe when you finish a client engagement and saying, hey, this is your best way, by the way, to get is going to the business sponsor if you're working with a business, or going to the client if you're working in nutrition or any type of health coach out there, to be able to say, would you kindly leave me a review, and would you mind giving me 3 other names that might take a discovery call from me on what I do? And if there's no need, that's fine. But that's very uncomfortable for a number of people that we talk to. And yet that challenge that on that same page, lead generation, 54%, again, it goes back to um, that's a real challenge for a lot of coaches. Those that have been coaching longer and have more credentials, the data shows that marketing is less of an issue because they've built the marketing chops. In our study, we had almost, I think 31% were 11 years or more in business. But yet, 54% do say, getting the lead generation engine going is tricky. And it doesn't matter how long you've been a coach or how many hours that you have under your belt. Um, Most coaches agree that their marketing feels inadequate and it feels like it's not enough. Coming from my prior life, the one thing I would say, the one thing I tell coaches is it should feel that way because marketing, and this is a good thing, believe it or not, because marketing is often corollary. It's like it's not causation. It's like one thing
Mhm.
doesn't lead to another. So I had so many. I'm not a coach. I'm an executive coach, and that's my home over there. But because of the study, I'm asked my opinions a lot. But I said, for marketing's often corollary. In other words, this leads to that, leads to that, leads to, my last opportunity that I got was 7 layers deep of this person talked to that person, then that was 3 meetings that led to that's more like what marketing looks like. It's not, I did one post, Chris, and I did one article and the impressions were down and the thing, I'm not surprised because LinkedIn algorithms, that's a whole other, and some of the algorithms and the other social tools are a funny thing. They're a funny thing, right? So it's like counting on just impressions to do it is probably not going to. Doing a combination of things
Mhm.
is what will generally lead to longer term success. Because again, it's there's a line that's not exactly straight. It's not linear.
Yeah, and it's
Mhm.
finding that right combination of what to do
Mhm.
that
Yeah,
is important, especially with the time pressure of starting a business. There's the 3-year clock that you mentioned earlier, but there's also whatever time pressure that um, entrepreneur as a coach has to generate their initial revenue,
yeah.
because you can't keep going with it,
Mhm.
just trying to market and hope that something happens. Um,
Yeah.
how does a coach know that they're ready to be an entrepreneur? What thoughts do you have on that?
Oh my goodness. There's a few observations that I have that were more anecdotal, and then there are a few that we got at that were observations from the study. But um, I don't know if Bill, you would agree with this, but I think the first one is, well, to me, it's about what your tolerance level is and your comfort level is, and acknowledging that when you're going from safety and security of income in a
Mm,
guaranteed job with a guaranteed paycheck to the potentially unpredictability and the ebb and flow of an entrepreneur is like, how comfortable are you? How tolerant are you of change? Those headwinds that you talked about, the economy, the great pause, I like to call it, where employers are like, we definitely are interested. Just come back in
mhm.
6 months when we figure out the tax and the tariffs and all that good stuff.
Right.
Um, so I would say comfort and tolerance comes to me as one of the things that we found in talking with people and from the study, the predictability of the business. How uh, comfortable are you in not just defining your value, but articulating your value? How comfortable are you creating a pricing model? Um, and typically it should be plural because if you say three, if you think of JetBlue or there's usually three options, right? And Dan Ariely, if you listen to him, he's the behavioral economist. He'll tell you have at least three options because 60% will pick the middle. That stayed with me as I,
Mhm.
um, but how comfortable are you, A, creating a model, and then B, communicating that because that's
Right.
about your value and your worth. And that's a real challenge for a lot of the coaches that came up clearly in the marketing and the value proposition part of it, that's tricky for people to communicate their value and the ROI of the business. What are you going to get on the other side of the coaching? What's the impact? How do you? So,
Mhm.
as an entrepreneur, to get back to your question, how comfortable are you nailing it and communicating it? And then how comfortable are you in measuring? Because, if there's no data to drive your decisions and there's no follow up, um, you deserve you deserve it to be able to follow up, and you owe that to yourself to be able to do that. So that's kind of, it's a mindset thing. So I think as an entrepreneur, it's like I gave them an hour of my time. This is how I, and I owe it to myself to follow up to find out, how did I do? Are you still interested in my services? Is there anything else that I can do? So it's that mindset too. How comfortable and how prepared are you to assume a mindset um, that is in a wonderful, it's awesome running your own business, but how
Mhm.
comfortable are you if there's something on the other side that you have to navigate? I
Yeah.
think those are what I've seen. I'm sure you've got a couple others to add to that list that may be from your learnings, but that's what we found.
Yeah. And, as a business coach myself, it, it, I feel more prepared than other coach entrepreneurs in terms of the business planning piece. So
Mm,
it I know there are coaches out there who help coaches. They're
mm,
meta coaches. I like to think of them. But it feels like there's a whole aspect of pre-coach education that we need to have, like, answering the mythical question, do you know what you're getting into?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah,
How ready are you to run your own business, which is, there's that love of coaching and wanting to leap right in and help support the clients that you want to get. But
yeah,
as we've mentioned earlier, and again, just a reminder for the listeners and viewers out here, we're talking about Chris's report, which is available at
yeah.
coachonwards.com.
Thank you.
Um,
Yeah.
there's that tension between being a coach and being an entrepreneur. And
Mm,
one of the findings that just nailed it for me, this is on page 43 of the report for those of
mhm.
you who have the report and are following along, that most coaches do not identify as entrepreneurs. Only a quarter of the coaches out there think of themselves as entrepreneurs. Most
Mhm.
coaches think of themselves as coaches.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a big, well, yeah moment, or if that points out to something bigger. What's your thoughts on it, Chris?
Oh my gosh. So on the other side of asking all the coaches, like, what would you want out of this? One conversation from somebody in Barcelona, we got in the subject of, do people see themselves primarily self-identify more as a coach or an entrepreneur? And we got into this discussion, and I said, I'm going to embed that into the study and then pull all the data to see if, based on how you self-identified, is there any statistically meaningful difference in the habits and practices of those that primarily identify as a coach versus those that primarily identify as an entrepreneur? And there is. And to your point, it was 23% said, yep, I'm over here. I'm an entrepreneur. I kind of, revenue and profit drives the way I'm always thinking is the numbers. And if we go back to remember success, 81% said, hey, listen, if my clients are happy, I'm happy. And you've got my attention all day long. Well, right under that was 24% said revenue. Revenue is how I primarily
Hmm.
define success. So this was interesting because it squared up very neatly on this question that we asked. There's no wrong way. I feel the need to say that because you can self-identify as a coach primarily and be perfectly fine. You can self-identify as an entrepreneur and be perfectly fine. There's no right or wrong. But what we did find is if there was around a 60-point difference between the way the responses were, entrepreneurs tend to outsource more. They tend to have multiple partners. They tend to have multiple revenue streams. We didn't really have the opportunity to get in too much into pricing and revenue streams, which we did look at the report. So coaches knew. I didn't know. I had all these different levers coming into it. Um, And so entrepreneurs tend to have a number of different revenue income streams that are coming in. They spend more time on the business. They spend north of 30 hours a week on the business.
Hmm.
And the coaches spent significantly less time on the business. And this again is the averages and what the data told us.
Okay.
Um, those were sort of the bigger findings. And then there's a whole list. I think we had about 20 different habits and patterns that were statistically different, coming out as an entrepreneur. And I think the learning, I've been asked this question a lot, is what's the takeaway from this information? And I said, well, you know, clearly, the habits and practices would tend to square up with successful entrepreneurs. In any book that you pick up or whatever, it tends to be spend a little bit more time, outsource when you can, pay for the talent when you can to help with the bookkeeping or a virtual assistant if that's a so there's a number of different perhaps data points that came out of the entrepreneurial habits and practices that tend to square up with the longer term businesses that tend to enjoy longer term success, more sustainable practices.
Mhm.
And that's not to say that the coaches aren't successful. I want to make sure it doesn't mean that just because you're starting out, you won't be profitable. You will be. There's plenty of them starting out that are profitable.
Oh yeah.
So it is to say that there tends to be habits and practices to be mindful of that tend to lead to more profitable practices longer term,
Okay.
profitable habits, I should say.
Yeah. And it's something we point out in business coaching a lot is, habits lead to outcomes.
Mm, yeah.
Having and I think that's one thing that our listeners and viewers can gather among several other wonderful findings. Again, I encourage our listeners and viewers to go to coachonwards.com and get the report. Well worth your time. I, it's 50 plus pages, just chock full of really important findings. And since my podcast is focused on human resources and learning and development professionals, some of those listeners and viewers out there are going to be curious about coaching. So what's the first step you think they should take before they make the big leap into the coaching world?
Oh, I keep going back to the prepare where we started that it is about preparing. And if you, so 25 years ago, I built my house and found my land. And I just, you wouldn't build a house without, I don't know, a blueprint or
Hmm.
subcontractors and contractors. You wouldn't, I don't know, run a marathon. You would just decide one day I'm going to go and run a marathon, right? Like, you wouldn't do that, right? You have to prepare and you have to be able to surround yourself with, um, the right information and the right people to be able to do what you need to do. So I think if you're thinking about getting into it, it is a fantastic profession for, particularly for, I think, for human resource and learning and development people, because you're already heart centric in the field, right? You want people to walk away with more than when they started, when they leave you and the gifts that you're bringing to the table. So it feels like a beautiful transition into this. But I think the foundational elements of going into it are important. I also think about, my prior profession, we used to say, right message to the right audience at the right time.
Hmm.
No different in coaching, by the way, but it is right message, right audience. And I think, by preparing, all of that experience that you bring to the table, there are so many incredible coaches that have very different backgrounds that serve these niches that you touched on. Like I had 7 M&As in my background. That was, and I was on a deal team. I only share that because that Achilles heel of my career, like it's a bit drudgery work, right? To get on the other side and assimilate companies and assimilate all the stuff that goes along with it. That's become my gift in coaching because I have become interesting because of my background. So, um, right message. So nailing your message and nailing that value part of it when you're preparing is, for me, very, very important for anybody jumping in, because once you nail that, it feels really good to be able to take all these experiences and infuse your business with that. Right message, right audience, figuring out your audience, figuring out your niche, figuring out who you best serve will serve you incredibly well. It's that foundational work of prepping yourself for jumping into the business development part of it. And then right time. You We talked a lot about entrepreneurial preparedness, and if you can be tolerant of the ebb and flow, and you can get comfortable with learning all these things that might be uncomfortable just because you haven't done that in your career, um, which many do become comfortable, because as we learn things we become more comfortable. right message, right audience, right time. I feel like those are the key elements for somebody jumping in. And if you nail those three things, that's your runway. Data and research is important to me, whether it's, you know, my report or any other research that you do, and there's lots out there, but make sure that you're shoring yourself up on not just the certification process of the process or becoming a coach or doing the coaching thing. It's the business development side of it. That's what we chose to focus on in this research because we felt it is a significant gap. There was no other report out there to help with the landscape on the business development side of it. Wherever you get your data, this report or anywhere else, just make sure that you're shoring yourself up on building a resilient practice for the long game. Like we've talked about that a lot. Think about what profit means to you. Are you okay not being profitable for the first 1 or 2 years? You might not be. So just
Right.
ask yourself the hard questions, just as we do as coaches with our clients. Ask yourself those same questions. So
Yeah. Yeah. All important questions to consider. And, it's
yeah.
something else that's shown through in the report is the need for coaches to have those sounding boards, mentors, advisors,
Mhm.
people who have the perspective and experience to counsel a coach that's setting up a new business or a new coach for that matter. Um,
Yep, absolutely. Leverage coaches in your own to help you
mhm.
become better. I completely agree. That's a great add to that. There are many organizations doing a very, very good job. Yours is one of them to help coaches do the best job that they can in helping others succeed. So it sounds obvious, but there's some fundamentals that I think if you nail those fundamentals and those foundational elements, you're off and running.
Yeah. Yeah, and it is important to not only identify your target market, your message, and your timing. It's also important to build that resilience and confidence in yourself as a coach,
Mm.
because that internal motivation is coming from within, especially for the solopreneur. There's so much resting on their shoulders that if you're coming from
Mm.
full-time gigs like you and I did, all of a sudden you're on that tightrope alone. And
Yeah,
sometimes it feels like there may not be a net underneath you.
I know. Yeah.
Um, yeah. Is there one big lesson that you've learned that listeners and viewers should think about as they're going to start their next chapter, whether it's coaching or something else?
Mm. It's the easiest but the hardest question. Maybe it comes down to that word risk, your appetite for risk, and I'm in the group of people that would be if you just don't know unless you try.
Right.
And if you're going to try, back to that word prepare that I've used a million times, just getting the foundational down. But I think you just don't know unless you try it, and just being prepared. If you've done all the homework and you've done the research and you've had the conversations, you've got your advisory circle, you've got your coach to help you, um, take the jump,
Yeah.
jump. Again, if you've nailed that right message, right audience, right time, that last bucket there, it'll always feel like you haven't done enough in that last bucket, or that it might not quite be. There's a million reasons why you shouldn't do things. Um, so if not now, when? That was the question that was asked of me when I started. If you don't do it now, Chris, when are you going to do it? And maybe that's the
Right.
question to leave people with.
That's the same question I faced last year
Mm,
when I was given the opportunity to go into coaching, and it came down to a question I faced several times in my career, if not
yeah.
now, when. Just as a reminder for our listeners and viewers, Chris and I have been talking about her report about the business of coaching 2025, which you can get at coachonwards.com. And I highly recommend doing it. Chris and I have been talking about this report for a few months now, and it's been such a pleasure to have you on the podcast today so that we can share some of these findings with with our listeners and viewers. Is there anything else that you want to add for our listeners and viewers, Chris?
No, thank you for the shout out. We do a newsletter called Entrepreneurs. Just given all the newsletters I was getting, it's only business development. And so it's always got tips and AI, and it's got a bunch of different things that are coming up, discoverability. There's so many things that we're trying to hit that are right around the corner and right around the bend. So you can sign up for that. If you go to the down at the bottom, it says for more updates, just plug in your email. It's not a sales pitch, and it's not one of those emails. We really try to make this based on what the coaches want on the business development side of the house. So definitely.
And sign up for this newsletter. You're going to get information that you may not be able to readily find anywhere else. So, Chris Chaia, thanks for being with us today on The Perfect Route.
All right. Thank you.